Awesome, thanks. Welcome everybody to class 5 of the summit, Effective Negotiating Tactics. So today we're going to cover off some of the personality traits of a good effective negotiator, some of the the basics of what we need to actually adhere to here in our province in Ontario as far as regulatory concerns, and we'll look at a few other neat instances about negotiation strategies and tactics for you. I always start this class with one of my all-time favorite quotes in life. This is from John F. Kennedy, the former president of the United States. Let us never negotiate out of fear, but let us never fear to negotiate. And I've always, when I've taught this class, or quite frankly, anytime I've been in a negotiation settlement situation, which is always, I've got 2 kids, a wife, you seem to always negotiating something with the family or others. I always have this kind of percolating in the back of my mind, which means, never be afraid to throw something out on the table. Now, if it's outrageous or something like that, of course, we're not going to do that. But if it's reasonable, why not do that? And JFK, of course, being very famous president of the United States, I think it's just a brilliant quote. This came out of the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was a situation where the world was on the brink of a nuclear holocaust, nuclear war, in the early 60s. So this was just a brilliant quote, and I like to always start this class by throwing that out. So what are some of the traits of a good negotiator? We got 10 of them. Is emotionally stoic, calm, and collected. And in brackets here, I've added the movie, quite frankly, A Few Good Men. If you've seen the movie, what a brilliant movie it is, Aaron Sorkin. If you haven't, I highly recommend you watch it. It's a brilliant movie. It's with Tom Cruise, Jack Nicholson, and Demi Moore. But there's a scene in this movie, and it's prepping for the actual court case that's going to unfold. And of course, we remember, if you've seen it, the famous Jack Nicholson line in that courtroom, "You can't handle the truth," is that famous line. But in the prepping, Tom Cruise is there with Demi Moore, and I forget the other guy's name, Richard something or other, and they're prepping about how they're going to present themselves as the counselors for the defendants. And so Tom Cruise says, listen, we're going to sit there, we're going to be calm. The plaintiff or the prosecution may say something outrageous, say something that is very damaging and hurtful to our clients, but we're not going to react to that. We're going to allow that to just occur, so that we don't actually cause the jury to think that, oh my God, they actually landed a jab on here or landed a knockout punch on us. So it's just let that slide, let it happen, don't react. And of course, there's a scene later on in the courtroom where, in fact, it doesn't happen, where they remain calm and stoic. Demi Moore has a bit of a meltdown, and it causes the jury to look incredulous at the defense team here. And so, at the end of that scene, when the courtroom emptied, they talk about that and hey, listen, we should have remained stoic and calm. And so when we're at the kitchen table or we're at the office negotiating an offer, just always remain calm and collected. It's an amazing trait to have, irregardless of the situation you're in. So you may be just a boyfriend, a wife, a girlfriend, whatever, a friend. Just be calm. People appreciate that calm presence in them. And as I said, go to watch that movie. It's a fantastic scene and a great situational awareness type of thing, which is our number 2 trait of a good negotiator: situational awareness. That's big picture, small picture, or 360 kind of thing. So I would say if you're negotiating the sale of a house, it's being able to zoom in and dial into this very specific kind of behavior, maybe, or patterns that the clients or the other side is exhibiting. So, for instance, are they crossed hands leaning in to you, which means they're very interested, they're engaged, or are they sitting way back and, like, hey, I'd rather be in a dentist chair right now. So you want to kind of take in those types of pictures of what's happening in the small scale. In the big scale, it might have been our client or the other side had a bad day, and if they've come in, they're a bit grumpy, let's kind of give them that emotional calm, stoic kind of a person there. So this big picture, small picture, 360 situational awareness is very important. I always used to go into the room and just kind of gauge the room, take a look to see what cues may exist there to tip me off onto situations. Number 3, You can find allies and common ground. And so, picking an ally as one of your clients, and it may be, the husband, maybe the wife, maybe the kids. I described to you in one of my last classes about kids and children, having them as your allies in the situation that you're doing. And so, maybe it's the wife really just needs that bigger house. So they're selling the house, and we're at the kitchen table, and we're a couple of $1,000 apart, and we seem to not be able to bridge the gap here. And so you try to find the ally, and maybe it's, like I said, the wife, and hey, maybe we could help you help yourself getting out into this new property that we're looking at. All it's going to take is the signature here. You try to ally yourself with one of the parties, and by finding that common ground, that what we do here, the decision we make here, is going to benefit us down the road long term to get us to where we're going to go. Number 4, get out of the way and allow things to unfold. Sadly, we use our mouth more often than we do our ears. And so, God created us with 2 ears, so we should be listening twice as much as we're speaking. And so sometimes, though, we put ourselves into the situation and cause the problem or cause the friction and implode situations, unfortunately. So sometimes just get out of the way, let it naturally unfold, and you'll get a lot of information by allowing that to happen. Number 5, ability to connect and be trusted relationally. This is the biggest decision most people make in their life. Hence, they want to have a relationship with their realtor, with somebody that they can trust. And so you've done a lot of that legwork if you're at the kitchen table now selling their property. But if it's, first time meeting them, you may be asking them to reach out to some of your trusted past clients, your testimonial database that you're going to leverage to help build that relationship. Number 6, your ability to persist, be patient, and use creativity. Persistence and patience, the double P's is what I call them. You don't want to give up easily, because typically people will throw those objections out. They're delay tactics, essentially. And as long as you've got, as I said last week, a couple of objection handling dialogues, 2 or 3 it would suffice to get you through that barrier, that gap, and just exhibit a lot of patience. And sometimes it's using creativity. I'm going to show you a couple of closing dialogues as well in a few slides in the presentation here, that use some creativity to help people get along and get further along in their decision making, because that's really what we're trying to do as negotiators. We're trying to get people to make a decision, and that decision, most often than not, is to make a yes decision, not a no decision. Recognize and adapt to nonverbal cues. I've kind of just demonstrated a little bit of that already, where people may be leaning in, they may be very focused and intently listening to everything you're saying, or they may be disengaged, leaning back. They may be, their pulse rate may be going up. Oddly enough, I would always try and look at people's jugulars when I was in a negotiating situation, see how stressful they were. Sometimes there's, they exhibit some perspiration as a result of that too. So look for some of these nonverbal cues that people may be exhibiting. Eye contact's a very important thing. If people can't engage you looking into your eyes, and they're always looking away and disengaged, then that's could be somebody that's not interested, or worse, it could be somebody that has ulterior motives that are not positive there. Number 8, never ever take anything personal. I mean, this is an emotional business, I get that, but as long as you're ethical, you have integrity, there's no reason for you to take this personally. This is part of the job that we do. We're navigating people through this landscape called selling their home. So never take something personal. And if you do, come talk to us, right? We'll talk you through the situation, because at the end of the day, you have their best interests at heart. You have their fiduciary interest at heart. And so, as long as you're not doing something that's putting yourself first before the client, don't take it personal. Number 9, learn from past experiences, both your positive and negative ones. If you're in a situation where it's been a positive experience, kind of do a check to see what happened there. You're going to want to go back and say, oh, I did this way as opposed to that way, and I had this reaction. Well, if it worked, go back and do it, right? If it's some of the dialogues we've presented to you in the course and that are in your workbook, fantastic. Use that dialogue again, because if it's not broken, Let's not fix it. And in the negative ones, what happened? Try to dissect the situation. Was there something that you said or could have said or didn't say that may have contributed to a negative situation? Or was it because of what they said and you were unable to navigate them through their concern? Number 10, this is a cool one, is willing to walk away. We always have to have that in our back pocket as negotiators. Is we have this kind of line in the sand, perhaps, where we are not going to cross it, and if we do, then we're taking advantage basically of ourselves. So you always have to have a walk away point. I believe in one of the courses, the designation is called CNA. They call it the BATNA. Best alternative to a negotiated agreement, I think, is what the walk away principle there is. But always have that in the back of your mind, that no matter where this discussion goes, if it reaches this threshold, I'm actually out. I'm walking away. Fundamentals. What you need to know in our business to operate here in Ontario. Well, you really need to understand the REBA 2002. It will be called TRESA. We have to understand all of our forms, the listing and buyer representation forms. I actually myself refresh myself once or twice a year, because we typically get new forms, they get amendments to them and whatnot. And it's always very helpful to actually read, and here's a little bit of homework for you guys after today. Actually grab a listing agreement, grab a buyer representation agreement, and read the document cover to cover. It's only 3 pages, but you'll be actually surprised sometimes at what you read and go, oh, I didn't realize that was there. I still myself have those aha moments where I see that. So just don't take it for granted that you know what's there. Read it, because if you've ever actually asked a question specifically about a clause in that agreement, you're going to want to be able to respond to that ethically, logically, and professionally. We got who are you negotiating with? Well, we got 4 things here. We got the seller, the buyer, other realtors, and yourself. Well, so we're negotiating with all 4, of course. The seller, if we're representing the seller, we're negotiating with them and on their behalf. If we're representing the buyer, we're negotiating with them and on their behalf. And then we have this interesting third category called other realtors. And I'm sure if you've done some transactions in your career that you've experienced that sometimes it's that other realtor is the one that's the most difficult to negotiate, because of course they've been in the business for 25 years and they know everything. And sadly, as I've always instructed our folks, usually when people start the conversation about how many years they're in the business, it just shows how many years they haven't actually read the new rules and whatnot. So you're always being mindful about negotiating with these other realtors that are out there, and yourself. You may bring to the table preconceived notions about the situation. Leave them at the door. Come in with an open mind. In my first course, I talked to you about the parachute and the mind. You have to have an open mind when you're coming in to negotiate. You're going to want to be prepared. We talked about that famous quote from Miguel de Cervantes: a man who is prepared has his battle half fought. If you're not coming to your negotiating table, wherever that may be, in an office, at home, wherever, if you're not prepared, yourself is not going to be, at full capacity to render the best service possible for whoever your fiduciary client is. Verbal negotiations. These are a couple of questions. Should you verbally negotiate an offer? And it's kind of a trick question, because the answer is yes and no, right? So yes, you are actually conversing with the other registrant, who is then conversing with their client, and we're talking to our client. So we're having a verbal conversation to move the conversation and this negotiation along. The question, are they legal and binding if they are verbal? And the answer is they are not. And then the last question here is, what law then governs how we negotiate an APS, which I'll flip down here and it'll show you in the last part there, the actual law that regulates why we need to have everything in writing in our industry, and verbal is not going to hold up in court, is called the Statute of Frauds. It actually requires all of our contracts to be in writing, to be reduced to writing for them to be enforceable. So, an offer is not valid until executed in writing and delivered within the irrevocable time. There is no recourse if buyers, sellers change their mind. So, writing delivered in the irrevocable time. That's very important. And this is going to, apply to not just here in Ontario, but for elsewhere, because there's time restraints and commitments on these contracts. And in our practice of doing these contracts, time is of the essence. So if there's a deadline to be made or to be met, then we have to actually produce within that deadline. So, the most common one that I always encounter and have discussions with is our deposit. And so in Ontario, we have 3 options for our deposit and our offers. Of course, we have upon acceptance, which is the default in all of the programs for writing your offers, all the clause programs. We have as otherwise described, and we have herewith. So those are 3 options. And let me just kind of dig in what they mean. Upon acceptance, folks, and let's put this right out there, very clear, is 24 hours. And it's 24 hours regardless of Saturday, Sunday, or statutory holidays. It is 24 hours, 24 hours, 24 hours. So if we're doing a transaction and it's 9 p.m. on a Saturday evening, and we've put in upon acceptance, we have 24 hours from the confirmation of acceptance of that offer having been transmitted back to the other party. So that could look like Sunday night at 9:30, 10 o'clock, whenever it's received and sent over to the other side. Now, if that client has a problem getting their money drafter or a draft from their lender that day, then if they can't produce that document, that check, that draft, they're in breach of the contract. So what I would recommend is to use the alternative, which is as otherwise described. And so you put in that little section, as otherwise described, and then you build it into your schedule that the buyer will provide, within 48 hours or 72 hours of acceptance of this offer, the deposit described herein. So now you've removed the requirement to produce and deliver that check within 24 hours. What does happen, if they don't deliver the deposit, the seller can treat that offer as being breached, and they can, go to their lawyer, get some, advice from their lawyer, which will inevitably say, go back to the market, treat this as a breach transaction, and go back and mitigate your losses. So I'm spending a little bit of time on this because it's actually a weekly conversation that I have multiple times a week, oftentimes, where we talk about the deposit and this upon acceptance thing. So, just save yourself a little bit of aggravation if we're not able to get our deposit in time from the banking institution that our client's using, or on the flip side, if we're representing our seller and we don't think they can deliver within 24 hours, use the as otherwise described. One we had this week was one of these banking institutions that's not a bricks and mortar banking institution. It requires, I think, 48 hours just to transfer the funds into a bricks and mortar style bank. And so they had upon acceptance, we had to go back and amend the transaction where we deleted upon acceptance and we inserted as otherwise described with a 48 hours upon acceptance clause. So it's very important. Don't want to be in that situation, especially in a hot market. If you secured the offer, you definitely don't want to be in a situation where the realtor from the listing side calls you and says, sorry, Mike, you had 24 hours. It's now, 24 hours and 1 minute. We're going back to market. The seller's mitigating their losses. Now you've got a buyer that's very upset, and we're stuck in the middle here. So very important. As otherwise described is how I would do all of your deposit structures going forward. Making the best offer. This is what I always used to say to my buyers. You want to make an offer the seller is afraid to turn down. Now, in this environment that we're in, or just came out of with these multiple offers, that's what was occurring. People were putting offers in that the sellers were afraid to turn down. And of course, this caused this escalation in the values to occur. If you offer too low, the seller will counter or possibly reject it. Now, if we're coming into more of a balanced market, which seems to be the case for some of the areas, you don't want to go in too low now to put off or upset the seller. You want to come into a situation where can be a negotiation of back and forth. And in the multiple offer scenarios, always said this to my buyers: have no regrets. And this is the actual dialogue. Put in your best offer so that when you wake up tomorrow, win or lose, you will know you put in your absolute best. So what does that mean? That means if the buyer has another $5,000 in their back pocket, don't save it for tomorrow, because tomorrow might not happen because the seller may proceed with somebody else's offer. If you have that extra 5,000 in your back pocket, pull it out, put it on paper, so that if you did ultimately lose that night, that your seller, or so your buyer goes home and says, hey, listen, I did put my absolute best in. Because you don't want to wake up the next morning to find the published sale price was $2,000 more than what you offered, and your buyer had an extra $5,000, so you would have been $3,000 higher. So have no regrets. This is a big ticket item. We're talking about a purchase that is a long-term situation. We're not talking about, we're holding the real estate for 30 days or 90 days or a year. We're, holding real estate for 5, 10, 15, 20 plus years. So $2,000, $3,000, $5,000, $10,000 in the aggregate, in the big scale of and scheme of things, really doesn't affect exactly the overall purchase price and scenario. So have no regrets. Burn that one into your unconscious mind. What are the critical elements to your offer? These are some basics, but deposit, conditions, irrevocable times, closing date, terms. In spite of these, let's just all agree that the most important element to any offer is the price. That's the first thing a seller's eyes go to when the offer gets presented to them on the table. They ignore the closing date. These conditions, they don't look, they just go right to the price. So if we know that the price is the most important element to any offer, that's where we have to have all of our discussions and negotiation dialogues prepared to address, is this price. We went backwards. Deposit. What does deposit do? The deposit shows good faith. You may have learned this, or probably learned this in your courses to be licensed. Deposit shows good faith and should not tie up too much of the buyer's funds should the deal fall through. Herewith, upon acceptance as otherwise described. We did chat about that. For single offers, a good range would be 5,000 up to 3, 10 for 3 to 5, 20 for 5 to 7, and 25 for 700 to $1 million. And I would say you're probably a $50,000 deposit for $1.5 million and upwards, and that'll escalate up. Multiple offers, kind of advise people to put about 5% down of the purchase price as the deposit. So this good faith element is, of course, what the contract law says about not delivering our deposits in time. This upon acceptance, 24 hours, because we're saying in good faith that we're going to deliver that. If we don't, then we've breached that good faith term. Now, if we have a transaction that is conditional, we provided our deposit, it's been deposited into the trust account, and we now have to mutually release that transaction, but the buyer still wants to go out into the market and buy something. So maybe they say the building inspection was not to their liking and to their standards, so they want out. And so now we have to get these funds back. Well, that could take some time. So the other thing to be mindful of is, you may want to do as otherwise described, staggering deposit structure, where your initial deposit, within 48 hours is say $5,000, followed by a future deposit 5 days or 3 days after removal of conditions of 20 or 25,000. So basically, you're doing an as otherwise described staggered deposit structure. This way, we're not tying up so much of the buyer's funds, and yet we're providing to the seller this good faith that, hey, listen, once I remove all my conditions, once I'm completely satisfied, my financing is in place, my building inspection's been conducted, or the status certificate's been reviewed, I'm going to give you, 25, 30, 50, 70, 100,000, whatever that deposit looks like, but only after I've met those conditions. So you start, you inch in, you tip your toes in the water, and then followed by the bigger deposit once everything is satisfied. I think that's a brilliant way to do it. It's how I used to do it in my last few years of selling, where I would do that as otherwise described. Initial smaller deposit followed by a much larger deposit a few days after removal of all conditions. Gave peace of mind to everybody, quite frankly. What is the best method? Certified check or draft is the best method, 100%. It protects realtors and helps to facilitate a quick return of the deposit should the deal not firm up. So I just want to share with you that if somebody comes in with a regular check, which we're not allowed, called legally, to demand a certified check or a draft. But if they do show up with a regular check, believe it or not, it takes about 21 days to go through our system or the banking system to confirm that that deposit's there. Now, although we see it virtually immediately on our digitized screens when we go into the banks, the actual banking system takes 21 days. So if they've given us a regular check and now they're mutual releasing, we're not actually providing them back that check until we've verified on our back end that that check has cleared. So it's just something to be mindful of. If you have a buyer and the building inspection your thoughts maybe that it may reveal some deficiencies there, you may want to start with a small deposit, but put it as a bank draft, because the bank draft is really like cash. So the listing brokerage should be able to turn that around depending on how quickly their accounting systems work. We try to facilitate turnarounds 24 to 48 hours here for our mutual releases where we're holding the money in our trust. But very important, just if you can, bring the money draft or certified check. Conditions. I used to have a pet peeve when I was on the listing side, and the buyer's realtor would come in, and there would be conditions, and I have no problem with people putting conditions in. They're putting them in there for the benefit of their buyer. But when the offer comes in and there's maybe in total 10 clauses or 12 clauses, when they put their offers in and they don't cluster their conditions together, they kind of start off with a buyer agrees to pay the first sum. Then they say, do you have an existing survey? Then they hit you with a financing condition. And then they ask for something else, statement, a warranty statement, or whatever. Then they hit you with a building inspection. I'd rather have all of my conditions, if I'm a listing realtor, to communicate to my seller, all in order so we can tackle them, because those are the more kind of complicated things to get through to our sellers. So if you're putting an offer in just for simplicity's sakes, to make your offer that much more easily be read and interpreted, cluster all your agreements, all your conditions in the APS, and don't have them scattered. In multiple offers, you may have to remove their conditions. There is Form 127 that I highly, highly recommend you guys use. I don't think that's there on their slide, but just write down AREA Form 127. That's the document that we can put in that it's the buyer's direction that they've actually advised us that they don't want to put in a condition of financing, inspection, status, what have you. I'd also have those conditions, by the way, in your agreement, and then just remove them, cross them out or X them out, have the buyer initial them, and even to triply protect yourself, send them an email to say, hey, just want to follow up. We got this offer ready to go. Just confirming that we've removed all the conditions, that you're aware of the risks associated with that. So you'd have 3 actual backups if you were to have a offer go in where there's no conditions on it. Irrevocable times. What is their purpose and their meaning? Well, it's to actually set a time and a deadline in the contract. So if we're putting an offer together today and we're going to be negotiating that this evening, the default, of course, in the web forms is 11:59 p.m. I used to always go in and change that. Who the heck wants to work at 11:59 p.m. unless you really, really have to? So I used to modify that, bring that down to like 9 p.m., more reasonable time. Chances are the sellers work, our buyers probably work, and I don't want to be at 11:59 p.m. So you put in 9 p.m., and that means that your offer that you submit, and once it's conveyed and submitted to the other party, it becomes their possession, right? It's not our property anymore. It's now the sellers. They have until that time. So it's 9 p.m. They can accept your offer as is up until 9 p.m. At 9:01, if they haven't accepted it, or let's say they accepted it at 9:01 and send it back to us at 9:01, well, it's outside of and exceeded the irrevocable period. So it's not actually an accepted offer. It doesn't mean also, where I see this trick a few times, where the seller and the seller's realtor will sign the confirmation of acceptance as 8:59 p.m. Hey, look, we accepted your offer. It was under 9 p.m. Wrong, unless that was actually sent to you at that moment at 8:59 p.m. or 9 p.m. If you receive that as the buyer side, great, you're under the irrevocable period. But if you signed it there with your seller at 8:59 and you waited because you celebrated with a glass of wine or a beer, and you send that at 9:30, 10 o'clock, and if the other side says, sorry, we're not accepting you, you're outside the irrevocable period, they're right. The buyer is right in that case. What length of time should that be for? As I just said, the shorter the better. You don't want to be putting too much time into these irrevocables. Sometimes it's required. You may be an estate sale where there's a trustee of the estate, or there's a POA situation where you need to have maybe 24 hours or 48 hours, but those are usually spelled out in your listing, MLS listing. They'll tell you that, or a power seal too. That sometimes is going to require a 48-hour irrevocable. Is there any requirement for the seller or buyer to reply within the time period? And the answer simply is no, there isn't. There's no actual requirement for any of the parties to respond to any of these offers. They can look at it and just decide we're not going to do anything with that. We're, essentially ignoring it. I do recommend, though, communication between parties is a very important thing. So, if your seller is outright rejecting it and doesn't want to, do anything to sign back or even acknowledge that they've looked at it, reach out to the other realtor. Communication will help kind of, maybe encourage them to come back with something better. Maybe it was such a low offer, the seller didn't even want to respond to it. They were insulted, who knows, right? But communication. What happens if either seller or buyer accepts after the irrevocable time period? Well, we described that. If they accept it after, it's not a valid contract. Time is of the essence. If we're not within the time period and we sign it outside of that time period, the other side may, say, okay, I want to stay in this, and you'd have to amend then the irrevocable and do a little bit of paper to resurrect that. But if it's outside the irrevocable time period, it's outside, it's null and void. Registering an offer. Michael Southers and I did a Zoom, I think about 2-3 months ago on this. We probably will do another one this year. We'll do probably two a year going forward. And this is the single largest complaint that the regulatory body RECO in Ontario faces, which is the whole process of registering offers, and particularly when there's multiple offers. So it's Bill 55 actually regulates this, and there's 5 methods that RECO has stated that it's legal for us to register offers. So of course, the first one is the actual offer itself. And this, to me, folks, is the most important one of the 5. My recommendation for you would be to keep a copy of the offer for every one of your offers. You can digitize it, put it into a PDF. But also, RECO says you can register an offer using Form 801. Now, people think that Form 801 is a mandatory document. It is not. If you look at the top of that form, it'll use the word evidence, and that's truly all it is. It's going to be used as evidence in the event that there's a RECO complaint where the consumer or the other registrant doesn't believe that your stated 5 offers that were registered on the property was true. And they're asking RECO to verify whether there was 5 offers. RECO is going to look for these 5 types of things to see whether or not you can substantiate you had 5 offers. So the Form 801, not mandatory, folks. All it is a document that can be used as evidence. We also have text, email, and fax. So text and emails, what would we do? We'd send a text, hey, Mike Kennelly, it's Matt Aldred. I have an offer registered, signed and registered for your property at 123 ABC Street. I understand we're presenting tonight at 8 p.m. And I'll be sending along the actual offer itself. So you can do that type of registering in those 3 other formats. Now, I highly recommend not using fax. I'll have a little slide here about my 2 cents on what I think about faxes, but because there's so many complications there you can run into. So you can only register an offer that has been signed. Let's get that out there too. If you are sending Form 801, a text, email, or faxing, you have a registered offer, you have to have the actual agreement purchase and sale signed. So you can't just go and send that out there without having a signed APS. Front desks are not responsible for knowing the number of offers. Only the listing realtor does. And it's their responsibility to update everyone. So this is where your role, this is the heavy lifting, where you have to have the broad shoulders to take care of this stuff and manage this thing properly. Be proactive. Call, if you're on the buying side, be proactive, call the listing realtor often, early, and do it in writing. Do it by text, do it by email. Keep this thing as a paper trail so that if ever you needed to substantiate what was happening, you'd have this record that is in writing. So I would say, as the listing realtor though, your job is very complicated. We have some tools now using, for instance, Broker Bay that has made our life a lot easier. But if you are hosting an offer situation that turns into a multiple offer, be very, very careful and prepare, because as I said, this is the single largest complaint source in RICO right now. And I don't even know what the percentage is, but it's way more than 50% of all RICO complaints have something to do with this situation. Delivering an offer. Well, we're in COVID here, folks. So in person may not be applicable here, but in a non-COVID world, delivering the offer, do it in person. Get face-to-face with somebody. I found that most offers that I had accepted for me as a buyer's agent were done because I was in person and I had my buyers around the corner or at the local coffee shop ready to sign any amendments. Now, of course, we have DocuSign. Things are so much more convenient than they were even for me, 12, 13, 14 years ago. So do these things in person. By fax, I'm going to give you, as I said earlier, my stories of why not to use fax. But you can do email and you can do it by courier. I don't know anybody anymore that does it by courier, but I did in the past when we had relocation transactions going back and forth. We did have courier services, couriering documents. Power sales sometimes had to be done that way as well. In person, it is the best strategy. The best strategy is just before the presentation. Do not send the day before or early morning, afternoon if presentation is in the evening. Once you send and give the offer to the seller and the realtor, it is their offer and they do not have to give it back. So what I'm saying here is, if you're doing the in person, don't pre-send your offer by email to them or by text. Show up with your offer, right? But once you hand over that offer, be it by email or in person, that is no longer our buyer's property. That is the property of the seller. It's something that a lot of realtors don't realize. They think that they can just take that back, or the term that we would use is rescind their offer. No, you can't. Once that offer is in their hand, that offer becomes the property of the seller. Let me give you a scenario that a lot of realtors think that they can rescind an offer in, and it's in a multiple offer situation. So say I'm the first person that's registered and I send my offer in to Matt, and Matt's got it. Now, Matt's job is to keep me up to date of any future offers being registered. And let's now say 3 hours later, I've been told by Matt that there's now 3 other offers, so 4 offers in total. I can't then tell Matt I'm rescinding my offer because I only put my offer in based upon me and my client being the only offer. Well, unless you have a statement and clause in there, which I think has been tested in court as not being valid, but unless you do something where you have that in there to possibly challenge it, that offer stands. So that your offer that you submitted, even though when you submitted it, there was no other offers, cannot be rescinded by you. It has to stay there. And so at the time you made it, yes, you were the only offer, and this is what you were prepared to pay as the only offer. 3 other offers doesn't necessarily mean that they have a better offer than your original offer. And if they do, then your offer is not going to be accepted. But if they're not, hey, your offer may be accepted, and you were happy about getting that accepted before the other 3 materialized. So it's something just to wrap around and put into the back of your brain that once you send it, it becomes the property of the seller. But once the irrevocable passes, now the offer becomes null and void. There's nothing to treat there anymore. By fax. So here's what I think about fax. I don't even know what our fax number is here. I made that kind of joke a while back on the Zoom call with Michael. Do not send an offer by fax. Too many things can go wrong. Fax in a public area, if it's in a phone, it can be seen by other realtors. Fax may be out of paper or jammed. The secretary may not check it often. Fax may be stuck in memory. Fax may be accidentally grouped together with other faxes. If you do send by fax, send with a cover page and near the presentation time. Call the brokerage to confirm and verify that you're in receipt of your offer. So if you still want to use fax, and we do have folks that still do use fax here, just take that extra precaution. If you're going to send it, send a cover page, call the listing brokers, confirm that they've received it. And that way, you know that your offer's in their hands, because far too often, some of those reasons it's been jammed or didn't get checked, or it got sorted with other people's paper on a fax, it just gets lost. And that's not a good thing when we're representing our buyers. Presenting the offer yourself allows for face interaction with the seller. Seller and realtor are able to interact and facilitate a successful presentation, and puts you in a better position to interpret the situation and adapt to enhance your negotiating position. Basically, folks, it humanizes the entire experience for all parties. This is your chance to tell the seller who your buyer is, right? If you've got a young couple and maybe the sellers have raised a family in this house, they've had 2, 3, 4 children that they've raised, and now they are empty nesters, and this new buyer that's coming in is a young family with 2 or 3 young kids. Well, sometimes those sellers see that. They see, hey, there's a succession to this nice young couple with their kids. They're just like we were, because that's putting them in and humanizing them to the seller. And oftentimes I got negotiating offers for less money because I described who my buyers were to my sellers and created that human empathetic experience for both parties. They felt good. The sellers felt good about selling their home, that all their memories were in, to somebody else, another family that could create those same memories. Don't ever discount the power of that. Sometimes money is not the almighty decision maker here. Sometimes it's the heart and feelings that make things decisions for people. In fact, we had this situation last week where we were on the back end of one where our offer was actually more money than another buyer's offer. But the other buyer had this young family, and it really struck a chord with the seller. And so when I had to dig into this with the listing brokerage to find that out, it made sense to me, and I communicated that to our buyer and to our buyer's realtor. Obviously, they were very upset, but they understood as well. So here was a situation where a seller chose an offer that was $5,000 less, just because that buyer's clients, the sellers could see themselves as that couple 30 years before. Counter offer, what is it? Well, counter offer is when we go back and forth. Think of like a tennis match, right? So I always think, I'm serving the ball into your court. So I've sent my offer. If you bring it back to me, hit the ball back, or your offer, that's countering it back to me. So what is it? It's a new offer. It has new terms. It may have new conditions, may have a new irrevocability. Most terms should be similar, however, but you have to have an attentive eye, folks, to any and all changes so that you're able to advise your clients. So don't just take it for granted that the only thing they may have changed was the price. Go through every page, folks, because they may have crossed something out that you didn't catch. And if we don't catch that, and we don't advise our buyers, and we don't initial that change, then we really could have a situation where we don't have a binding agreement. So what choices does the buyer have? And quite frankly, the seller have? Well, they can accept an offer. They can counter the offer. They can decline an offer, and they can do nothing with the offer. As I said earlier, the do nothing approach, I don't recommend that. I think communication is a sorely needed trait and thing that we have to have in this business. I think most of our things break down because of lack of communication. So the do nothing option here is really not something that I advocate. It's either one of accept, counter, or decline. The seller's offer. Well, sellers can actually send an offer to a buyer. You may not have known that. Is it a good strategy to allow the buyer realtor present their offer to your seller? So the buyer realtor comes in. Do we let them communicate and talk about their offer, or do we, as this listing side, take that offer and communicate that to our seller? My advice to you would be that you communicate to your seller the contents of that offer. You may allow the buyer realtor, before you do that, though, to tell a little bit about their client, or before, if you're the buyer's agent, before you submit it over. Hey, listen, I want to share you who my buyers are. They're really excited about your house. They love your house. They really see themselves here and raising their family. So you've humanized them, and then hand over that offer. What should you do to prepare the seller before the presentation? I always used to show up about a half an hour before the offer presentation. So if we're doing a presentation tonight at 8 o'clock, I would say to myself, hey, listen, I'll be over to your property tonight by 7:30. Just want to go over a few things, how we are going to structure this. I would go over actually the few good men analysis to say, listen, regardless of what, when you open that file folder and see that offer, regardless of what you see on the price or anything else, don't have any reactions. Just sit there as if nothing's happening. Because if you show an emotion, that's a tell. You're showing the other side that, hey, you're really excited or you're disappointed. We don't want them to have any sense of what your feelings are or where your mindset is. So is there any disadvantages to that? Yeah, sure there are. I mean, you could have a situation where a buyer could take over if you let the buyer take over the presentation. You don't want that. You want to be in control of that situation. Are there any advantages? Yes, if you're in a situation where we described where they're humanizing their client, and you've got another realtor that's got great communication, negotiating skills, there's lots of advantages to facilitating an actual positive outcome there for the situation. Multiple offers. What is the best strategy when working with multiple offers? Well, the best strategy probably is if you've got 10 offers or 15 offers or 20, is to make basically 3 piles. I would make pile 1 as the pile that you're really seriously going to consider. Pile 2 is the maybe pile, and pile 3 is there's no chance pile, right? And so that you can quickly kind of strategize them and stratify them. As a seller, well, the seller is going to be in a lot of emotional disruption here. They're selling their home. They're experiencing all these thoughts, all these feelings, and so you're going to really want to make sure that you control them and control those emotions and their behaviors. And so that's why you're showing up a half an hour earlier to set that stage. With the buyer, well, we talked about the buyer. The buyer wants to put an offer in with there's no regrets. They're going to wake up tomorrow knowing that they put their best effort forward. Can a buyer sign more than one offer on the property? So that's kind of a trick question. Yes, they can. So if we have a buyer that we can't get a hold of, now DocuSign and Offensive allows a lot of this to be avoided today, but in the old days, we sometimes had to go drive and back and forth to our buyers and get a physical signature. But we would do sometimes signing 2 offers. So offer 1 would be submitted to the listing agent in the event there was no other offers on the property. Offer 2 would be if there was going to be a multiple offer situation. So yes, they can, but you're only going to obviously be submitting 1 offer. You're not submitting both. Are there things that you should never do when representing the buyer? Absolutely. Never, ever discuss their motivation for why they're buying the house. It could be a flip, things like that, or never disclose what their ultimate price is. So that's something that you have to maintain the confidentiality with your buyer, and vice versa with your seller. So you're not disclosing those types of things. Presenting offers when representing sellers. Use an up-to-date current CMA. So here's one of the things that we sometimes forget to do. We may have taken a listing in the old, a year ago world that we lived in, and the last, 25, 30 years of real estate that I've lived in, where typically it takes, 35 to 45 days to sell a house. We've done our original CMA on that property, and now we're 30 days into the listing, and we haven't updated our CMA, and now we've got an offer tonight. So if you're in that situation, prepare a new CMA. Now, if you've listed the house today and the offer comes in tonight or tomorrow or a few days from now, chances are, you're not going to be having to do a full-blown update on the CMA, but you're going to do a quick check just to see whether or not there's been any other competition that's hit the market. But it's very important, if you've got a listing that's been on for 20 plus 30 days, 40, 50 days, to always do a full and current updated CMA. Have available your showing list and feedback. So I used to always print out a copy of that. Now we have BrokerBay to do that for us, but I'd always have a showing list with the feedback out there, so that, in a situation where an agent's going to come in and try and, discount the value of the property, I say, well, I've got lots of activity, fantastic feedback. It's very early days here on the listing. And so, we're not really prepared to accept your offer at the price that you've tendered here. Prepare a comprehensive net sheet. So I've showed you in my working with a buyer's booklet, a net sheet kind of graph. If you can refer back to that, same thing for your seller. You're going to want to create a net sheet for them. what is it that they're actually going to net in their pocket after all the expenses have been incurred. So that may be discharge fees for their mortgage if they are breaking the mortgage earlier, our real estate fees, legal fees, land transfer tax, things like that on the buying side. Discover any buyer's motivations or weaknesses if you can at that face-to-face meeting. So it may be that they're not supposed to disclose this to you, but maybe they do. Maybe they tell you that the buyer has just been promoted and the buyer is wife's pregnant and they need an extra room. So these are motivations that they're going to tell to you, where you can use that as a opportunity to leverage up the value of the property for your seller. Preparation for low offers. Overpriced listings. What do? Well, we educate and display with MLS data that the only houses that sold are properly priced according to the market. And this is in a standard, typical marketplace. Right now, our listing prices, I would say, folks, are more a marketing strategy as opposed to a scientific number we're coming up with. So it's more of a, hey, let's put a number out there that's going to attract the greatest amount of buyers to come to the table with an offer. So it's more of a marketing price today. A seller refuses to make repairs on their property. Educate them by putting them in the buyer's place. Our human nature typically exaggerates, and this is in our own minds, the cost to correct defects and make repairs. Consequently, the buyer will make a lower offer. So let's just use painting as an example. If the house hasn't been painted in 5, 6, 7 years, well, there's probably some stains on the wall, some scratches. It looks a little bit weathered and aged. Why not go and invest in some paint? The dollar return on something simple as that is tremendous. It may be the property has carpet that's 30 or 40 years old. Why don't you look at pulling the carpet out and maybe putting in a replacement carpet or a laminate or a engineered hardwood? Why? Because, hey, the seller is trying to present and convey their property in like a spa-like setting to the buyer. So if the buyer comes in and sees 40-year-old carpet and sees that the paint hasn't been done, it sets their mind in a negative direction immediately, because they're thinking, what else has not been maintained in this property? So the easy fixes like that can translate into massive upside for our sellers. So, but I would always say paint is your easiest investment to make to put your property in the best possible light with a buyer. Backup offers. What is a backup offer? Well, in the good old days when we had inventory out there and we had options as buyers, we had these backup offers. So if it didn't work today on your property, well, we always had something maybe as an alternative or as a backup for our buyer. A little bit difficult to imagine or envision that right now, perhaps in our marketplace, but in a stable, balanced market or in a buyer's market, you definitely have these backup offers. The advantages of that, of course, is that you're not going to be overpaying perhaps for the property as the buyer's side, and you've got your limit, you've got your line in the sand that you're not going to cross. And if you maintain that level, then you can always go out and get the other property. Are there any potential drawbacks? Sure. I mean, if you really, really wanted that property as the buyer and you play that game, well, maybe the seller says you should go and buy that other property if ours is not to your liking. Here's something that does happen, thankfully not very often. Maybe every couple of years I'll get this situation occur. But it's where we've sent 2 offers on 2 separate properties as buyer realtors. If both of those offers are accepted, you've basically, sorry, we're talking about the seller. Never send back 2 offers on 2 properties. So we have maybe 5 offers that come in. We like 2 of the 5, and if we send back 2 of those 5 offers to the buyers, we've actually, if they accept it, sold the house twice. So don't do that. I've also had situations where buyer's agents, the reverse of this, have sent out 2 offers on 2 different properties and both got accepted, and they've now bought 2 homes as buyers. So we can only be trading in irrevocable periods with buyers or sellers for 1 property at a time. So please, folks, don't send back 2 offers on 2 properties. I'll tell you a funny story about the one, my first week as a manager. It was in 2007, January. got a call, and I thought I was being practical joked on by people, but the realtor, who turned out to be a real realtor from the office, not in the business anymore, called me and said, "Hey, Mike, just wanted to double check. I'm pretty sure I did it right, but I just want to double check. You know, I did offers last night, and we signed back 2 of the offers, and just want to double check. I'm pretty sure I'm right, that it's the first person that accepts actually bought the house." And so, as I said, I thought it was somebody joking, doing a practical joke on me, and I said, "Well, no, no, you both accept the property. You've sold it twice, and now you're in a bit of a bind here." Now, fortunately, that situation, that one of the other parties signed the offer back, and we were off the hook. But please, folks, never do it. And this person, by the way, had been in the business at that time for about 15 years, and had told me after that they had done that multiple times, and had never actually caused himself any problems. But that could be a big problem. So let's avoid that at all costs. Overcoming objection. Become a master and expert in objection handling techniques. We got chock block full of dialogues for you in this book. I'm sure you guys are sharing some awesome ones in your groups, which is fantastic. In our appendix here, you've got a whole bunch of situational techniques and dialogues to deal with that. And here's a couple of extra ones that I'm going to throw in that are not in your book for you. One is the reduced to the ridiculous technique, and the other is called the casino close. And so how those look, and some of you may have heard these before, and that's fantastic. This is a refresher on it. And if not, take a little bit of notes here. So on a ridiculous technique, it's reducing it down to a base number. So let's say that we're confronted with a situation where there's a $10,000 price gap. So we take the $10,000 top line number, and we break that number down by the amount of years, let's say, that we're going to live in this house, right? So let's say we put an objective of 10 years living in that house. So we divide 10,000 by 10. Now we have $1,000. So this is going to cost you an extra $1,000 a year to live in this property. But hang on a second. Let's take that number and divide that by 52, which is the weeks in a year. So we divide that 1,000 by 52, we get that number. And then what we can do is divide that number by 365. So we can reduce this number down however we want, so that we get a one-day cost. This is going to cost you, and this is a made-up number here in the scenario, but maybe it's going to cost you $5 a day for the next 10 years to own your dream house. So it's reducing it down to the ridiculous, where people cannot say no to $5 or $3, the cost of a Starbucks coffee, or I guess even now a Tim Hortons coffee. You reduce it down to that ridiculous, so that they have that ability to make that decision. Now you can work this on both sides for a seller, but it really does work mostly on the buying side. The casino close. This is imagining you're in a casino and we're on the seller side in this situation. So you can do it for both sides, but I used to use it mostly for the seller side. So, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, we're sitting here. We've got this offer that's come in. We're listed at, say, $950, and the offer is at $940, but they really want $945. But we've been told in no absolute terms by the buyer's realtor that this is their max. There's nothing more. If you sign it back, my buyers are gone, right? So we've now kind of established this is the very best, but our sellers still want to sign it back. So, using this casino close technique would go something like this. Well, Mr. Rousseau, let's imagine we're at the casino. Now, I am working in your best interest, but I have to share this with you in this analogy. We right now have $940,000 at the casino. We have $940,000 worth of chips at the casino in this offer if we accept this right now. So you're walking home with $940,000. What we got to do right now, what you want to do is you want to put that $940,000 out as a bet to make an extra $5,000. Now, if you were at the casino and you were betting on blackjack, would you make that bet? Or if you were at roulette, would you make that bet? Would you bet $940,000 in the hopes that you're going to make $5,000, or would you not make that bet? Because essentially, part of my job is to educate you. Essentially, that's what you're doing. We're taking $940, betting we're going to get an extra $5,000. It most likely won't work based upon what we've heard from this buyer's realtor. But if we go forward, don't be disappointed if we don't get the result we want. So that's called the casino close. So we got 2 extra techniques that we can use in our arsenal. Reduce the Ridiculous, and the Casino Close. They're brilliant. What you need to work on. Here, we talked about this many times, and you guys are already in your groups. This is fantastic. Find yourself a partner to role play with, or partners to role play with. Pick out a current listing on the MLS and prepare a mock offer that you present to your partner. So if you haven't done one in a while, or you've done 10 of them, just keep on practicing. Do these mock offers so that you're keeping your saw sharpened, basically. Call your phone and leave yourself a recording of a dialogue you've just practiced. This is how I used to do it. Sometimes you're impressed with what you've said. Sometimes you're like, oh gosh, I could have done better here, and you make that correction. Visually record yourself role playing and watch for your non-verbal communication cues. And so now we have so many different devices we can use, very high quality stuff where we can be doing that and seeing what our facial reactions are, what our body posture is, what we're saying visually. This is so helpful for us to become the professionals that we really want to become. And that's the end of our slide. If Matt, you want to end the recording.